Chapter 4, 0 Hour. Days prior to the raid, late evening sets in as a white-feathered owl hybrid dressed in light green scrubs presses the end of his near-finished cigarette against an ashtray-chopped trash can. Refitting his glasses, he brushes back his feathered head before heading up a flight of concrete stairs leading to a wide, towering clinical structure. Nearing the front entry, he hears a set of approaching footsteps from the rear. Turning his head, he peers over his shoulder onto the richly developed urban environment behind him, finding no one nearby. Returning his attention to the glass double-doored entrance before him, the owl hybrid cautiously enters the active interior of the facility. Walking down one of the halls, he glances at a pair of doctors huddled over a stretcher-restrained man as he violently fights against the metal cuffs binding him to the stretcher. Passing the two lab-coated men, he hears one of them remark, "Why do we always get the patients the other facilities can't handle?" Continuing further down the corridors, he spots half a dozen men in green scrubs crowding down a trio of stretchers. Laying himself against the side of the wall, he peers at the passing clinical workers as they frantically carry their physically restrained patients through the halls. Reaching the door of his supervisor's office, he brushes against a departing pair of black and white hazmat-dressed personnel. Entering the room, he ventures to a multi-screen top desk manned by his supervisor. A heavy man fills his seat from behind a desk of half a dozen computer screens, each displaying 9 camera perspectives throughout the facility. Approaching the hefty man, the scrub-dressed owl announces himself. "Sir." Tilting his head up from the monitors, he acknowledges the owl hybrid, welcoming him in a saged and grizzled tone. "Adel, nice of you to take up the skeleton shift." Lifting himself from the cumbersome wheeled office chair, the supervisor stretches out his hand towards the employee, presenting a thin, rectangular-shaped card tethered to a metal keychain. Cautiously accepting the item, the owl hybrid reads the name tag on the side of the hefty man's shirt, reading, "C. Tylerson." Retracting his hand, the supervisor points to an adjacent door, directing, "Your equipment is over in the locker room." Turning towards the mentioned room, Adel asks over his shoulder, "Will I need anything special tonight, sir?" Answering the departing employee, the supervisor exhales, "Nothing special tonight. Grab your standard loadout." Reaching in for the circular knob on the door, Adel exhales in response, "Thank you, sir." Watching the owl hybrid open the door, he calls out one last statement, "And the name's Conrad. I'm not a fan of this sir shit." Entering into the new room, the owl hybrid finds the walls of its interior bearing numerous locker units. Taking a brief scan about, Adel finds one of these locked wall-mounted containers marked with his name, written on a rectangular banner, screwed onto the center top of the thin metal door. Converging to the marked locker, he fits the key into a slot nearby the railed handle. Unlocking the container, he pulls the door open, revealing the contents inside. Just below eye level, laying atop the highest shelf, a dark-colored earpiece radio and similar colored headband greets Adel's sight, followed by a set of pale hazmat fatigues hung upon a hanger along the wall of the component. Drifting his sight, he finds a compact rifle and utility belt hanging from a thin nail on the interior of the unit store. Leaning into the locker, Adel equips his earpiece radio, turning the dials to his regular frequency and volume levels, before turning his attention to the hung hazmat suit. Dressing himself into white fatigues, the owl hybrid spots through his peripheral vision a pair of black leather gloves, aside a pair of matching boots and gas mask resting at the floor bed of the locker. Fitting on the boots and gloves, he reaches for the headband, curious of its attached eye patch. Adel directs his sight to the inside of the accessory, discovering a slim, built-in electronic device bearing a camera-like lens in the center, surrounded by subtle padding. Wrapping the band over his feathered head, the owl flips the switch aside the rim of the accessory. Viewing his surroundings in 2 varying perceptions, he perceives his immediate environment in natural sight through his left eye, while seeing through a digital filter through his right. Reaching below, he retrieves the gas mask from the storage unit floor bed. Fastening the dark gas mask, the owl hybrid lines the eye sockets of the plastic breathing apparatus over both his naked, dingy yellow eye and his now patched eye. Reaching inside once more, he grabs the utility belt, fitting it around his waist. He notices the pouches attached are already occupied with ammunition clips for his firearm. Retrieving the dark compact carbine hanging from inside, he shuts the door before heading towards the entry he came from. Passing through the door, he is abruptly met with a brief brush against his shoulder. Turning about, the owl finds another security personnel hailing him over a hoarse, static filtered voice. "Something's going on near the front entrance," he nervously informs before continuing, heading down the hall. Following his co-worker, Adol quickens his pace, matching the man and now sprinting before him. Passing two intersections, the co-worker turns right, leading Adol to a railing, looking over the main entrance lobby. Resting his hands over the metal railing, the security workers observe the motions and actions of those inhabiting the spacious room. Past the front entrance, another pair of armed security personnel peer past the thick glass windows into the shroud engulfing landscape just beyond, while a half-dozen scrub-dressed nurses trailing about. Observing a bright flash from outside, a duo by the front entrance steps away from the double-door entry, raising their compact rifles towards the thick glass windows. From above, a smooth yet high-pitched voice calls over the building intercom. Hazardous activity detected. Lockdown initiated. Watching one of the security guards reach for the lock mechanism under the handle to one of the doors, Adol grips his carbine as he breathes with tension. The doors abruptly swing open, pushing the two security personnel further into the lobby area. Multiple bursts of light followed by a continuous yet brief auditory crackle prevail into the room, knocking the two hazmat-suited men to the floor. Witnessing a pair of security guards bleed out in a puddle of their own blood just past the front section of the lobby room, Adol and his co-worker raise their weapons past the railing and onto the breached front entrance. The environment draws to a sudden still as the inhabitants suddenly reserve actions and remain silent after watching the slaughter of the two hazmat-suited guards. Finding himself in this shared state of mind, Adol pulls himself to react by hailing his supervisor over the earpiece radio. "Conrad, you picking this up?" Adol asks, referring to the live video footage streaming through his eye patch. "Yeah, I see what's going on. Hang tight, I'm dispatching backup," his supervisor calmly replies. Continuing to watch the open doorway, Adol tenses his muscles as he focuses his aim towards the center point of the opening leading onto the dark-shrouded landscape. Suddenly, two parallel groups of four dark-fatigued men enter through the breached entrance, fanning out systematically into the lobby room as they fire upon the occupants of the first floor. Reacting on their instinct of fear, Adol and his co-workers fire their carbines towards the invaders. As two of the armed assailants from the team on Adol's right collapse from the projectile-induced wounds, the remaining invaders immediately direct their weapons towards the elevated hazmat guards. Seeing their gestures, the two elevated hazmat-suited guards take off in full sprint for a section of wall past the end of the railing. Before reaching the covered section of the upper level, Adol's co-worker succumbs to a punctured wound through his shoulder as accurate gunfire rains upon the railed balcony. Reaching the walled section within the corridor, Adol turns about, finding his co-worker crawling towards him, while a constant stream of projectiles continue to strike nearby. Raising his carbine towards a crack between the wall and railing, the Al hybrid scans his limited perception of the lower area in search of the dark-fatigued invaders. Just as a dark silhouette meets his sight, a projectile suddenly grazes his right cheek. Frantically throwing himself behind the wall, Adol ducks as a stream of projectiles shifts towards his direction. Taking brief gaze of the corridor where he had last seen his co-worker, he finds him rendered to a motionless hazmat-suited body soaking in a puddle of blood. Fearing that he is outmatched, Adol pulls himself deeper into the walled section of the hall. Reaching an intersection, the surviving hazmat guard encounters a passing team of four additional security personnel. Watching them cross onto the railed balcony, Adol positions himself behind the nearest right corner of the corridor intersection, aiming his weapon down the blood-stained hall. Two members of the team line themselves against the wall connecting to the railing, while the other members walk alongside the opposing wall. Soon after, the leading guard near the rail peeks his head past the walled corner. He is sent falling onto the marble floor, bearing a small circular puncture wound burrowed diagonally through the side of his forehead. Witnessing the descent of yet another co-worker, Adol begins to step back as he begins to doubt his immediate safety. Hearing another set of crackling gunshots erupt from behind, the separating security guard suspects another scene of similar violence is now taking place in another part of the facility. Continuing to slowly distance himself from the ongoing firefight, Adol turns about as he begins to head down the corridor where he originally came. Passing through the various halls, Adol encounters another pair of security personnel perched against the corner of one corridor. Seeing sudden bursts of light spring from the barrels of their compact firearms, he jumps back to the opposing side of the wall. Cautiously peeking his head past the drywall corner, he watches a lone assailant collapse onto the marble floor. Waiting for the pair across the hall to progress further into the corridor, Adol takes keen observation of the fallen body. Upon his distant visual examination, he finds no visual markings or decals on his fatigues, and the weapon bare of any manufacturing markings. Noticing the two hazmat security guards reach the next intersection through his upper peripheral vision, Adol carefully advances towards the deceased invader. Hearing another burst of gunshots echo from the hall ahead, he tilts his head up, witnessing the collapse of his two armed co-workers. Holding his carbine firmly, he focuses aim just past the two fallen bodies, Adol bruised with the fear of meeting similar fate. As another period of chilling silence prevails throughout his immediate environment, the lone security worker fills with paranoia-induced tension. In a split-second decision, he reaches for a nearby handle, opening one of the rooms alongside the hall. Pushing open the door, he trips over the deceased assailant before falling into the room. Nervously restoring his stance, Adol unintentionally drags the body partway through the entry. Attempting to shut the door, he finds the dark-fatigued corpse to be blocking this motion. Dragging the body inside, the security guard hastily pushes the door shut. Leaning against the now-closed entry, Adol listens carefully, perceiving a set of approaching footsteps. Quietly stepping away from the door, the lone security guard slowly backs himself deeper into the room. Turning about, he finds a pair of vacant linen-dressed beds with a small wooden table between them. Now teeming with anxiety of the coming intruders, Adol momentarily contemplates escape, accepting it as his plan of action only seconds into thought. Frantically undressing the deceased invader, the security worker struggles to apply the stained dark uniform over his own attire as his hands begins to shake nervously. Anxiety builds in his mind as he believes his concealment will be uncovered sooner and sooner, while he fits the Kevlar vest over his torso. Equipping the dark-schemed helmet, Adol rests its punctured glass visor down, concealing his still gas-masked face. The security worker moves towards the nearest of the two beds, partially pulling down the bed sheets. Directing his attention to the now stripped man, now laying nearly bare on the floor, Adol slowly leans in, lifting the body over his two arms. Resting the fresh corpse onto the bed, he pulls the linens over, concealing the body underneath. Confident in the circumstances he crafted for himself, Adol leaves the room. Entering into the hall once more, he immediately encounters a pair of dark-fatigued men. Standing just a meter before him, the two men stand still as they examine Adol. Reaching his hand out, one of the men gently holds the side of his helmet, remarking, "Looks like you got hit pretty bad. Are you okay?" the other one asks in concern. Gently pressing his hand against the nearest of the two, Adol softly pushes him aside as he begins to limp down the hall. Making his way into the main lobby, Adol finds a trio of Fox hybrids kneeling down, held at gunpoint by another three armed, dark-fatigued men. Soon following this discovery, he watches the men fire their weapons into the rear of each of the Fox's heads, sending them slumping forwards onto the floor. Stunted by the event, he briefly halts his movement, gazing upon the slain hybrids. The rightmost of these men acknowledges him, asking, "Are you alright?" Gathering his thoughts, Adol nods in the affirmative before trailing to the breached double-door entrance. Entering onto the shroud-blanketed landscape, he finds the vague outline of numerous vans parked about. Continuing past the line of vehicles, Adol spots an approaching figure from the side of his peripheral vision. Waving them off, he continues to limp into the shroud-engulfing night. Stay tuned for Chapter 5.